Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our discussions, our discoveries, our inquiries, and our examinations and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. And that brings us to a release of a title that had been previously existing in the Criterion Collection, but now is returning triumphantly with this new release that is also taking advantage of not just the Blu-ray format, but also the 4K UHD format in what is known as a 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition. I'm speaking about a work which is designated by Criterion at spy number 218, and it is from the year 1970. And the name of the filmmaker is Jean-Pierre Melville. And the name of the work is Le Cercle Rouge. This is the work from 1970, and it has an extraordinary cast, included in which are Alain Delon and André Bourvil and Jean-Marie Volonté and Yves Montand and others. And it is from the great filmmaker extraordinaire who is Jean-Pierre Melville. And this is the work which is Le Cercle Rouge, or a red circle. And please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation of the French language. This is a film that is so action-packed. It is so much filled with the great touch or cinematic touches or flourishes of Jean-Pierre Melville and company. And I think part of that has to do with the type of story that we are dealing with when we speak about the cop or police side and also the criminal side, and how they are evading each other, trying to chase after each other, chase after certain goals or ambitions involving theft and robbery, against all odds type of situation. And when those paths either diverge or converge, we get great sources and great electrifying and suspenseful sources of drama and plot and intrigue and action going forward. Again, this is Le Cercle Rouge. And so with that, we have a very intriguing plot that is already being hatched from the get-go, which is this plot or series of endeavors that are being tried by our main characters, who can be described as being on the other side of the law in one form or another, and they each have their own backstories or set of circumstances that explains their particular setups and circumstances when we meet them in the film. And I'm speaking of course, of the characters portrayed by Alain Delon and Yves Montand and Jean-Marie Volonté. And so here we have a great Jean-Pierre Melville type of plot or plot construction, namely the plot or planning of a particular heist or robbery of some sort. So this does involve meticulous planning, meticulous plotting. It also involves scrutinizing detail, inner workings, networking, who knows what information, and the like. And also at the same time trying to be very low key, very quiet, to not attract attention, while at the same time expressing or showing or otherwise embodying aspects of what could be described as being some kind of really quite human and humane approaches to philosophy or outlooks on life in the context of the lives of these criminal characters and their interactions with other characters on the periphery, for example, and how that informs not only their own world outlook, but also their outlooks on themselves, which could be said to be either maybe optimistic or perhaps even, on the other side of that equation, quite pessimistic or even nihilistic. And that sense or that sway in either direction, I think, is also guided along by the great coverage and cinematic stylings that we have on offer here from the great master that is Jean-Pierre Melville and company. That is one side, of course, because on the other side of that coin, in terms of this idea of law enforcement and those on the other side of that line, we have the various details of external characters or externalities that may or may not catch up with our group of, say, criminals, or dare I say it, anti-heroes. One of those factors is, of course, the police or law enforcement perspective, which is presented by the André Bourville character, and his pursuit of trying to capture or trying to stop whatever that's going on. There is also a really lovely mirroring effect going on here, in the sense that we have this very methodical and quite detailed approach to this process on this side, while we have a same or similar type of approach, at least in visual or cinematic terms, of the planning and the circumstances, and when things change, or when sudden occurrences that arise without any expectation or any kind of backup plan, how the people will all adapt. And that is across the board in terms of what we see in the context of this great work, the Cercle Rouge. Now, here, just as with many other works from Melville, we have so many things going on. Of course, we have the ice cold precision of the plot and its plot, the mechanisms and the devices and the turning of the gears, as it were. Something happens here, it affects something that happens here, it affects something that happens here, etc. And again, that is happening on both sides of this legal line, so to speak. So that is really fascinating and impressive. And it also shows, I think, a number of possibilities of interpretation, which makes a film like Le Cercle Rouge so brilliant. On the one hand, it could be suggestive of the fact that we have, again, what might be described almost as the wonderfully rendered, almost fetishistic nature of process, as it's expressed in this film, and indeed in other films, as linked to a sense or idealized notion, shall we say, of even ritual, which I think is also playing a big part in this and other Melville films. That's one way of looking at it, I would suggest. Yet another way, an alternative, maybe even contradictory way of interpreting or looking at this film, could also be in seeing these portraits or portrayals and absorbing the mood or atmosphere of the film, and the framing, and the almost the cool facades that might even be suggestive of something quite bleak, and I used the word before, I'll use it again here, pessimistic or even nihilistic in the setting or scene, some kind of external force which seems to be otherwise permeating the inner workings of the characters that we are dealing with here. This might be said, therefore, to be an expression of something that has no, say, hope or no chance of success. And that is due, again, to the fact of the various obstacles that we understand are set up in the context of the plot, but it also could be a type of broader, almost maybe a moral implication of what's going on, or to take it even further, there might be an implication that there is no kind of moral justice or moral scheme going on, which in turn would be a very, I think, frightening prospect. But it's one prospect I think leads to many possibilities when one is considering a film like Le Cercle Rouge. The notion of fate, and also the notion of the inner workings, or the inner ambitions, or the efforts of the individual versus a kind of broader sense of fate, or the inescapability of fate, and whether that indeed is based in any kind of moral sense of justice, or whether that is ephemeral and it doesn't even exist at all, which in turn I think leads to a very myriad of possibilities as far as one's interpretation of existence and life. Again, in the context of this really wonderfully cool rendered film that is a crime film, that is a caper film, that is also a film about betrayal and trust, or can we trust the other? What is indeed being told? What is the backstory that is leading to these various situations? Who is who? What is what? And when things go awry, and when things go unexpected, how do we adapt? And in those situations, can we really trust the people that we are really trusting, as well as, of course, applying the high precision stakes and the suspense and the action and the tension. It is phenomenal, the levels of suspense and tension that are engendered here in terms of the various set pieces that are involved in a film like this. This is really brilliant. And two, we can get the real sense and feel and taste and atmosphere that is given off and that is provided so brilliantly by not just the ambiance and the decor and the setting, but also by these great performances with legends, icons of not just French cinema, not just European cinema, but cinema overall. And so I'm speaking of the performers like Yves Montand and André Bourvil and Jean-Pierre Melville and Alain Delon in these. These are ultra cool. And they're so ultra cool in terms of style and look and the atmosphere and cinema aura, but they're also so ultra cool in the sense that we can see the cracks, we can see the fissures, we can see the tensions that might be bubbling up, the loyalties or lack thereof, or the questionings that occur between and among these various, say, human dynamics that are presented in the plot and the characters. So this is filled to the brim with so much of a sense of noir, a sense of police procedural, a sense of course, the criminal heist element, the planning and the trust and the betrayal, and indeed, yes, the suspense, tension, and action too, while at the same time, or in parallel to that, we have, I think, the great philosophical underpinnings that are implicit and maybe even directly present when we're speaking about Jean-Pierre Melville's handling of this great film in his hands, which is the work that is Le CERCLE ROUGE. The Criterion Collection releases this work, Le CERCLE ROUGE, under the spine number of 218, and this happens to be the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition of this work, which means that it has two discs, one for the 4K format and one for the Blu-ray format, and I'll get to that momentarily. And we have to remind ourselves too that this title used to be in the Criterion Collection under a number of formats, and now we have its triumphant return, as it were, this year in 2022. So this is a great thing to celebrate if you are a fan of this work, or if you're a fan of the Criterion Collection, physical media catalog, etc. So there's a lot to be happy about, as well as also seeing this film not just re-emerge, but also re-emerge with Criterion taking the opportunity to rely upon the 4K UHD format, which is, of course, still something that is relatively new in the format scheme of things, as we know. We can also recall that this film had appeared earlier in, say, this DVD release, again, spine number 218, from several years back. And then sometime later we had the Blu-ray release. It says your first printing from 2011. And so the DVD was 2003, yes, 2003, and then we had the Blu-ray upgrade from 2011, and now we have the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition here for this year, 2022. And I think we'll see a number of overlap when we talk about the supplemental materials, and we'll talk about the supplements momentarily. Before we do, we should point out that for this release, Criterion describes the transfer as such in the booklet. So about the transfer, Le CERCLE ROUGE is presented in its original theatrical aspect ratio of 1.85 to 1. This new digital restoration was created by Studio Canal in 4K resolution from the 35mm original camera negative and an interpositive at Huanti in Joinville-le-Pont, France. And it goes on to say, on the 4K Ultra HD disc, the feature is presented in Dolby Vision HDR, high dynamic range. On the Blu-ray, it is presented in high definition SDR, standard dynamic range. So I must say that this is for my money and for my eyes as a viewer. I do notice some slight differences from the versions that I have been used to watching. up to now, including the previous Criterion releases. So I do notice some slight differences, but those slight differences are not frequent in my eyes when I watch, say, the 4K release of this, and they don't at all detract, and they're not distracting from for me in any way. There is a slight, say, either maybe a change in degree, shall we say, in not in some areas here and there, but again, nothing that affects me negatively. And I dare say too that this will, like with other recent releases or recent presentations, and it's not true only for Criterion, but for any other physical media label, or for any label for that matter, and distributor and release company, etc. Whenever you have a new presentation, there will be comparisons. They are inevitable. Comparisons with past presentations, past release prints, past release versions. And so differences will arise or not, again, depending on what film you're working with or talking about. But I think for me, Le Cercle Rouge and this presentation here works very well. It didn't, I wasn't distracted in any way. On the contrary, I was so absorbed, I was swept up, and it did feel consistent with my understanding of the film as I have engaged with it, and it felt consistent in that way, and namely that it felt like it consistent with the cool breeze, almost brutal cruelty, shall we say, of the atmosphere that I feel this film espouses very strongly in terms of its theme and content. And so for me, the presentation felt very consistent with that. And so I'm very, very pleased with it. Of course, as I go on my own personal cinema journey, I will revisit this, watching maybe this or the other formats that I have available to me, and then seeing how I feel in terms of my overall preferences going forward. But for now, I am very impressed as a viewer of this, and I'm very pleased with getting this particular release. Now, when we speak about the supplements, we turn to our attention to this particular 2-disc release, and specifically the Blu-ray for the information about the supplements. And when we are considering the supplements, what do we have? We have the supplements which have overlap from previous releases, as I've mentioned earlier. So we're not getting anything new or exclusive for this new 2022 release. But that is not, I hope, to take away anything from what has currently been on offer from Criterion in the past, because what has been on offer is really, I think, quite excellent. There are, of course, I think, other releases as well. So if you are a completist with regard to Melville and Le Cercle Rouge, of course, I understand that you will be looking outside of the label of Criterion as well for those needs that you have, and that is a very reasonable position to have. But for purposes of Criterion and what the Criterion release has to offer, especially in the context of what we have seen before, let's see what we have now. So first up, we have what is described as archival footage. And this archival footage menu is further subdivided into a number of subcomponents. So let's go through each of those subcomponents one at a time. So the first of such subcomponents is Cinéaste de Notre Temps, from, it's described as being July 16th, 1971. So this is French programming. This is approximately 27 minutes. And here we have a type of very, I think, a very clever presentation of Jean-Pierre Melville, the artist, the man, the professional, the cineast, the filmmaker, also the businessman, and the thinker and the philosopher, as it were. And so this is set up in a type of a conceit, if you will, where it is a combination primarily of interviews and shots of Jean-Pierre Melville in action, as it were, with some interesting, say, what do you call it? It's with some interesting setups or recreations to further highlight or augment what is being told or discussed here. And it's set up in this conceit of portraits, portrait, in 9 poses or 9 portraits. And so we have different abilities or different, say, angles from which we can hear from Jean-Pierre Melville and consider him and his overall, say, prowess and his overall resolve as a thinker, as a worker, as a businessman, as an artist, as a cineast, and so much more. And so as a perfectionist, etc., so much more. So we have so many of these various angles prisms through which we can view and consider this figure that is Jean-Pierre Melville, who's of course a very important, significant figure in the context of cinema, and of course, obviously in the context of the Cercle Rouge. And so in these discussions, for example, we have his comments about creative control, the need for creative control, how he expresses creative control, what it is he believes creative control means for him, how that is expressed in the way his works are cast, the actors, and one of the fascinating details that emerges regarding the discussion of the Cercle Rouge, for example, here and in other supplements, is the casting and what could have been versus what eventually was. Now, there's nothing to take the what eventually was is so great in terms of the casting, but there are some stories about who might have been in those roles as alternatives or initially considered. Also, there is an idea here that is expressed about the idea of stardom and the idea of how stardom either fits or doesn't fit with Jean-Pierre Melville's conception of the creative process for a given project at any given time. And this is a very fascinating thing because there's this idea of the icon, the legends, that are emerging on screen in the works of Melville, Le Cercle Rouge being a great example of this on the one hand, but also the way in which that figures into the creative expression of an artist like Melville. And it's interesting to hear his words about this here. He also talks about various circumstances in the past involving a studio and certain sort of accidents or tragedies that befell that particular situation. And so those details also emerge elsewhere in the supplement, such as the essays as well. And I'll get to the booklet momentarily. And also the idea of working his working habits, what he needs in order to be able to excite the creative impulses, as it were. Editing is very important. Working with a certain degree of solitude and isolation is also mentioned by Melville here. And that also means the environment that he's working in, whether it's in the city or in the country, and the like. And so, and this and other aspects emerge. And I think we can see a really interesting parallel between this type of, say, work in isolation or work in solitude, and how this might be said, even in an interesting, almost meta way, to be extending forth in the way in which he expresses the characters and the landscapes of his various works, such as, say, Le Cercle Rouge. And I think it's really there. There's a feeling of a type of being cut off from everyone, even though people might be physically together in the same space. And I think that's a really great dynamic contradiction captured in the brilliant cinema of Melville. So for these and other reasons, I think this program is really quite good indeed, excellent indeed. In fact, from 1971, the TV French programming, Cinéaste de notre temps, approximately 27 minutes. And that's not all, because then we have more TV programming here, this time Pour le cinéma. This is described as being from March 1970, and this is approximately 5 minutes. And here we have on-location shooting, and specifically have more dialogue and discussion from some of the actors involved, such as Yves Montand, such as Alain Delon, and others. And we have two interesting discussions about what other projects they are working on at the time. This is, again, around the time of 1970. And so it's a very interesting discussion to hear some of the other works that they're planning, or maybe that are being released contemporaneously at the time of the filming of these interviews, etc. Plus, of course, we have the behind-the-scenes footage, certain scenes that are being either rehearsed or shot and then reworked, etc. So again, really great insight. Again, behind-the-scenes footage, really, really important. So Pour le cinéma, approximately 5 minutes. And then we have Midi Magazine. Again, this is described also from 1970, this time May 1970. And this is approximately 4 minutes. Here we have the discussion of this work from Melville, as in the context of the shooting, also in the context of the policier, the police thriller genre, and how this is, of course, very important in the hands or in the context of Melville, and not just in this film, but in the context of his great filmography. And so here we have more discussions about that. So this is really good indeed, approximately 4 minutes. And then we have more discussions. 24 heures sur la deux. This is approximately 3 minutes, and this is interesting here. It's described. It's described, I think, in the menu as being from October 21st, 1970, although when we get into the supplement, it indicates November 21st. So, but in any event, around this period of 1970, shall we say, approximately 3 minutes. Again, more discussions about the police thriller genre, policier, maybe discussion about the characters and their situations, their almost brooding nature, as it were. Alain Delon's character is described at one point as being like a lone wolf type, and I can definitely see that in terms of the loner aspect, but also very tenacious and very determined in that way. So, and that is also conveyed in the look as well as the feel of the character. So this is really good as well. And then we conclude this archival footage section with Morceau de Bravoure, and this is described as being from 1970, May 1973, approximately 9 minutes. And this is great because here we have more discussions. It's in an excerpt format regarding Melville and his take on, say, American cinema, and his, say, maybe interpretation or how he seems to inhabit that world when he is making his own expressions of cinema. And you can tell there is very strong connections, as well as, I think, purposely applied dissonances between what could be said to be the world or landscape of the homage or the inspiration from American cinema, as well as the way in which it diverges, Melville's cinema, including the CERCLE ROUGE, the way it also diverges from that cinema tradition. And so these and other themes, I think, emerge in this really great discussion here as well. So this is approximately 9 minutes. I should point out here that I'm not a fluent speaker of French, so I might be wrong in my details, but my understanding is that the sub-menu of the Criterion release here, where it indicates, has a little write-up of what a description of what this is. It says this is the title, or the subtitle of this is Les films policiers Melville, l'air parti. So l'air is spelled L and then apostrophe E, accent grave, R-E, parti. I hope I have the accent grave right. It's either accent aigu or accent grave, but I think it's accent grave over the first E. However, when we get to the actual supplement itself, I understand the word is not l'air parti, but actually one and air. And so the number one in air, I understand, means first, or première partie. So I think this word is meant to be première partie instead of l'air partie, but I think that's okay, because we do get the title itself, or the subtitle, when we get into the supplement itself. So once again, for anyone who is a French who understands and is fluent in French, please pardon me if I have made any mistakes there in that. But it's, I think, just a very minor thing. Overall, the supplement is really quite valuable, as are the other archival supplements that are included in this particular section. But that's not all, because then going forward, we have a discussion. This is described as being from 2003, and this is with Bernard Stora, the assistant director. And so Bernard Stora is sitting here one-on-one, again, in this 2003 discussion, and a 30-minute discussion approximately. And he speaks about a lot of great things here. He speaks, for example, about his first meeting with Melville, how that occurred and what happened there. Also, he has a great insight into the working styles and habits of Jean-Pierre Melville and the creative process, as well as how involved or not involved he is in the specifics of the set and the goings on of the staging, etc., the pre-prep and planning versus the actual shooting, etc. He also describes it too, Astroha describes too, about how each day, I love this phrase, he says each day was surprising, which then he goes on to explain what that means, which is there seems to be this way in which the creative juices were really flowing whenever he was working with Melville, such that Melville would always surprise with these choices or these possibilities that would be brought up, and then it would be up to the assistant director and the other members of the crew, respectively, to try to realize those permutations or changes again that were fueling the creative processes of Melville. So I think he expresses this in a very positive light, and this, not to take away from the demanding nature of the artist that is Melville, but that is part of the reason why this exacting process yields such great results like Le Cercle Rouge. So and then also this discussion from Stroha goes into about discussions or takes in relation to U.S. cinema, American cinema, which is always part of the discussion when we're talking about the landmark works of Melville, including as I say, the relationships or dissonances purposely applied between a work like Le Cercle Rouge and American cinema. So I really love this. Also, there are a lot of say production stories or details or background information that are revealed here and elsewhere too throughout this particular release, and supplements and essays, etc. So one such issue, or one such say story or set of stories that comes up, is the onset tensions or maybe relations, shall we say, between and among the people involved. And so, for example, the relationship between, say, Melville and the other actors in the film. And so what is oftentimes brought up, and including in this interview, is the relationship between the actor Jean-Marie Volonté and Melville. And so here, I think it's been well recorded about how it wasn't necessarily the friendliest of relationships, how we say, but here the discussion talks about, Stocher talks about maybe some of the reasons why he thinks it might have been like that. Maybe it was a clash of different characters, personalities, etc. That, and maybe there were certain issues that arose on set, but it ended up being such that the film was completed with Volonté's performance memorialized for eternity for many viewers such as myself and others to not just enjoy, but enjoy time and time again. I mean, there's something really brilliant about his performance here, as well as the performance of others, and that interaction or that dissonance that occurs. But of course, part of the, I think, allure, or maybe part of the mystique of Melville and his films, like Le Cercle Rouge, is and with other films as well, as the background details and information. So there are these stories that emerge, and these details emerge as well as during this Stroha interview. So for these and other reasons, it is a really great place to visit. The Stroha interview, the assistant director. Again, this is from 2003, borrowed from past releases, but it's great to have it here again, approximately 30 minutes. And that's not all, because then we have a one-on-one interview discussion with, again from 2003, with Rui Nogueira, and it's approximately 26 minutes. He's the author of Melville on Melville, and so he is an expert in the world of Melville. He has recollections about his personal interactions with Melville, and also on-set interactions, including his on-set interactions regarding the film or the filming process of Le Cercle Rouge, as well as talking about details about how he ended up being in the position to be able to not just interview Melville, but also to be able to assemble or write what ended up becoming, one of the key texts, right, in terms of Melville studies. So he comes here as a great expert. He is so well spoken, and he expresses those themes so nicely, as well as tying it in a very clear and easy to understand manner, tying those themes and concerns of Melville's works with the way in which he perceived the working method of Melville himself, the artist and the person and the human being. So I think this is a really great, insightful set of comments from Nogueira, done in a brilliant way. And again, it's carried over from past Criterion releases and other releases, but it's great to have it here again for inclusion, because this is really quite essential, or one of the essential places to go, especially if you're looking for a place regarding the, say, introduction, if you will, into the world of Melville. If this particular release is your first stop on the way in terms of a Jean-Pierre Melville journey, for your cinema journey. He does talk too about the the actors and their various, say, positions and their working methods as well. Montand, Bourvil, and Delon are mentioned here. Of course, there's the interaction of Volonté and Melville, and how Nogueira seemed to have his own, say, personal stake, in a manner of speaking, with regard to that quite tense on-set relationship. He does also speak about maybe anecdotes, details. There is a particular scene involving dance performers, women who are performing in a given scene, and he recalls various anecdotes about how each of the actors were reacting or encountering these performers, these dancers. And so there's some anecdotes about Yves Montand, there's some anecdotes about Alain Delon, etc. And also Nogueira talks about the release of the film and the initial reaction of the general public or the critical public to the release of Le Cercle Rouge at the time, 1970, and his own personal assessment at the time versus how he regards it now. And so there is a sense too about maybe we could look at it either as, or I think this is implied in his comments, we can look at it either as a type of a summation of Melville's work, or we can look at it as a consistent flow in terms of the ever-growing filmography of Melville at the time. Of course, this is 1970, and so it falls in a certain perspective of Melville's filmography, of course. But I think that type of dueling interpretation of this work, as highlighted or at least implied by Nogueira's comments, in my view, I think serve very nicely. And again, it's great to have that because we can see this film on its own terms as well as begin to appreciate it too in the overall context of Melville's filmography. So for these and other reasons, I think the Rui Nogueira interview brought over again for this release. It's very, very valuable, and it's so great that it's included here. So please check it out if you haven't already. Again, this is from 2003, approximately 26 minutes. And then the supplements are rounded out with a trailer. So it's a really nice trailer. And again, it's always fun to watch these. So these are these supplement components that are included here that have been maybe seen elsewhere in past releases, but it's, again, nice to have them here again for purposes of this new release or re-release from Criterion for Le Cercle Rouge. And I'd like to then speak about the booklet as well. So I have taken the liberty of removing the booklet from the casing prior to this. But let me just open up the casing too, just in case you are interested. So it is this plastic casing with the disc layering format here, as you can see. So maybe in past 4K UHD combo releases, not for all of them, but for many of them, they have come in the Digipack casing. But here we have the plastic casing. So my understanding, therefore, is that Criterion is not necessarily giving the 4K UHD releases from Criterion Digipack packaging exclusively, but sometimes we have the plastic case packaging. I have no issue with this plastic casing. I don't see that the discs don't touch each other in terms of surface exposure to each other. So I think it's a perfectly fine storage compartment system that is engaged here. So that's okay with me. Then we have the booklet, which I've referred to, and it's a staple booklet. It's robust, and the reason I think it's robust is that it's recalling what we had seen earlier. For example, this is the booklet from the earlier Blu-ray release, and here we have the new release, which is the new booklet. So in terms of look and layout, it looks pretty much the same. There is, of course, maybe the one detail of this particular line on the older Blu-ray release booklet, which doesn't appear on the newer 4K UHD Blu-ray combo booklet, but that's fine. The contents, when we look in the contents, they are more or less the same. There are a few minor section changes, but in terms of table contents arrangements, but in terms of the actual article or writing contents themselves, we are getting what we have received before. So what are those? We have first the essays. Well, the Michael Sragow essay, which is called Great Blasphemies, It's great, great, great. Please read this if you had. Again, please read these after you have seen the film because they do go into maybe specifics, or they have the potential of going into specifics about the plots of these films. So once you've seen the film, you can check out these great essays, such as the Michael Sragow essay called Great Blasphemies, excuse me. And then there is a sort of writing or interview, written interview with Melville himself called Melville on Le Cercle Rouge. And then we have music for Melville, composer Eric de Marsan. And then the Chris Fujiwara essay, What is the Red Circle? Because this idea, the image of Le Cercle Rouge, the red circle, and how it ties or not with concepts of fate and eternity, or doom, or maybe the individual versus the external outside, etc. So there, it's all implied in this great essay here. So what is the red circle, the Christopher Fujiwara essay? Then also John Woo's Honor, Loyalty, and Friendship, and then plus information about the transfer. So this is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. They were wonderful before, and they're still wonderful now to have these essays intact like this in the staple booklet, and I'm a fan of the staple booklet. I do note that maybe for the release I had of the earlier Blu-ray, there is a type of thickness to the paper. Maybe the laminating process of the actual pages gives it a type of thick approach, whereas I'm feeling the new release booklet, and it does have a slightly thinner feel, not so thick as it were, but that doesn't take away, I think, from the overall number of pages. There is a slight minor difference in terms of pagination, but nothing in terms of the actual content itself. Although, again, the paper maybe quality or thickness does feel noticeably different. But that is a very, 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 very minor point in my view, because, as I say, we do get these essays, and my goodness, again, the essays are one of the great things about this and other Criterion releases. So it's great to have this consistency and carryover. So if you haven't checked out the essays, please do. Again, after you have seen the film Le Cercle Rouge, it is certainly worth it, my dear friends. So that concludes our general discussion of this new release in 2022, which is of an earlier existing title in the Criterion Collection physical media catalog, but now we have it re-emerge triumphant in this way. It's great news indeed. It's also maybe consistent with past news, past release activities that we have seen from Criterion over, say, the past several months. Maybe the re-emergence of previously out-of-print titles, etc., studio canal connections, and the like. So what this means going forward, again, I'm excited to hear what possible news might or might not be on the horizon. Again, who knows? We shall have to wait and see. But until that day comes, if that day ever comes, maybe it doesn't come, who knows? But no matter what the case is, my dear friends, we can be rest assured that we are given this great release or re-release of this work back into the Criterion Collection, again at spine number 218. This is the work from 1970, the work from the great artist, filmmaker extraordinaire, Jean-Pierre Melville. This is Le Cercle Rouge. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.